So, like, all our stories are just for fun, you know. I'm not sure if this is the right place to spill my guts, so just give me a heads up if it's not. This story is all about my old folks. My dad's 65 and my mom just turned 61. They've been hitched for like 39 years and popped out 3 kids. My sis is 38, I'm 36, and my bro is 33. Even though we are all scattered around now, we've always stayed tight as a family. But, like earlier, this year has been a total shitshow for my fam. Found out that my mom was cheating on my dad only 2 years into their marriage, and on top of that, turns out I ain't even related to my dad biologically. It's been 7 months since I found out and I'm still messed up about it. In January, me, my wife, and our kids, 15, 13, and 10 years old, decided to do a family tree project. My wife got us all DNA testing kits. Our folks were super excited about this idea, especially the kids and our parents. Looking back, my mom was the most hyped, especially keen on digging into her family history. It's weird now, considering what happened, that she was so excited. I think she didn't really get how those DNA tests worked back then. Let me go back a bit. We got the testing kits in mid-January and did our DNA samples the next weekend when our parents were over on a Sunday. Anyway, we got the results back in late February and my wife noticed something fishy right away. Even though there was a clear genetic link to my mother, the report said there was no genetic connection between my father and me or any of my kids. We thought there must have been a mistake, so my wife called the company to complain. During the call, the rep did a quick check and confirmed that the results were from the package we sent in. When my wife found out, she hung up the phone in disbelief. We put them on speaker and told them our issues, making sure to point out that there must have been a mistake. We asked if they could double-check, and the rep agreed to talk to their supervisor and said they'd call us back. After we hung up, my wife joked that they might end up becoming part of our family. I laughed it off, but deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if it could actually happen. My wife told me not to be silly, but I could tell she had her own doubts. Later that afternoon, the rep called us back. So she called back and said everything was spot on. She even said she talked to the lab herself and confirmed the report was right. After I hung up with her, me and the missus just sat there, jaws dropped, staring at each other in disbelief. I was all over the place emotionally and started talking nonsense. Luckily, my wife helped me chill out and we talked about what to do next. We decided to hold off on doing anything right away and agreed to think about it some more since only the two of us knew about the results at that time, which was pretty coincidental. So, like, last night at dinner my daughter asked about the test results and me and my wife looked at each other and she told the kids there was a mistake and they needed to check again. Later that night I was talking to my parents on the phone and my mom asked the same thing, so I gave her the same story. The next few days were tough cause I couldn't stop stressing about it, wondering if I should talk to my mom about it. Her version of events or talk to my dad before deciding how to handle the situation. I even thought about just keeping it to myself because I knew once I spilled the beans, things would never be the same. But that just wasn't realistic because my family was waiting for answers and I couldn't handle the pressure of keeping it a secret. I kept putting off the conversation and as time went on, my anxiety only got worse. Finally, my wife convinced me to talk to my dad first and figure things out from there. So, we were trying to figure out what to do, and she thought it was a good idea, and I agreed. So, on Saturday, we headed over to their place. I was super nervous and my anxiety got so bad that I had to stop the car after a few minutes of driving. My wife took over driving for the rest of the trip. When we got to their house, I was still feeling all jittery, but strangely enough, when I saw my dad, I suddenly felt really calm. After some small talk with the four of us, my wife took my mom to the farmer's market and then. So, after lunch, when it was just me and my dad, I couldn't put it off any longer. I told him straight away, "Dad, we got the test results from the genealogy company." He said, "That's great, do you have them with you?" I said no, and then I had to explain that there was a problem with the results that I needed to talk to him about. He looked at me with a blank face, so I had to explain that the results showed there was no genetic match. So, I told him there was no DNA link between us. He looked confused and asked, "What do you mean?" I explained that the test showed we weren't related by blood. He chuckled and asked if there was a mix-up. I told him the lab confirmed the results. He asked if the tests could be wrong, and I said the company claimed they were pretty much foolproof. The look on his face will stay with me forever. I could tell he was getting all choked up, so he got up to shake things off. I went over and gave him a hug, and then we both started crying, something I hadn't done in forever. After we pulled ourselves together, I asked if he got what this all meant, and he nodded. He hugged me tight and said I was his son, no matter what the DNA said. He told me to quit crying before he started, but I knew he'd say that. Hearing it from him meant the world to me. Man, Hune has always been my hero. He asked if Mom knew, and I told him no. I wanted to talk to him first and figure out how he wanted to deal with it. He thanked me for my approach and said it meant a lot to him. Then we talked about when and how we should tell Mom when she gets back. After that, I called my wife to let her know I told Dad and it was time to tell Mom. She asked if she should come back right away, but I told her to stick to the lunch plan. Me and my old man were just chilling, shooting the breeze while we waited. We grabbed a sandwich from the kitchen since we were both pretty hungry. When my wife and Mom came back, we all sat Mom down and I broke the news to her. She looked shocked and kept asking me to explain what I meant. My wife and I tried to explain it all, but she just couldn't wrap her head around it. She kept saying we were both nuts and talking gibberish, going back and forth with us. So basically, my mom kept denying it at first, but then she kinda hinted like, well, if there's no match, maybe you got switched at the hospital. My wife jumped in and said that wasn't possible because the report showed a direct genetic match between me and my mom. That's when my mom knew she was caught and started crying. She left the room and my wife went after her. We could hear them talking, and when my wife came back, she said that my mom still believed there was a mistake. Then my old man went to have a chat with her, and we gave them some space for a good hour and a half before I thought I'd better check in on them. When I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. Dad told me not to worry, everything was fine, and he talked to me in a bit. When he finally came out, he dropped a bombshell. Mom had admitted to cheating around the time I was conceived, but she still swore that my dad was my real father. She wouldn't spill the beans on the other guy's name, saying it didn't matter and was in the past. When I heard this, I was overwhelmed with emotions. Dad saw how I reacted and pulled me in for a big bear hug, just like he used to do when I was a kid. It brought back so many memories and made me feel nostalgic. My wife couldn't help but tear up seeing us hug, and Dad even gave her a hug too. I was impressed by how well Dad was handling everything, but I could tell he was really disappointed with Mom. My wife and I thought it would be nice to spend the weekend with them, but when I brought it up to Dad, he wanted us to go back home. He said he wanted to have a chat. Me and Mom had a chat in private and he said not to worry, he'll call if he needs our help. We left that night, but I couldn't stop myself from calling him a bunch of times to see how things were going. The next morning we talked again, and he told me that Mom still wouldn't spill the beans about the other guy. He said he's cutting off contact with her until she spills. My wife made a good point about needing that info for medical reasons. Dad said he already told her, but she's acting like she doesn't care and wants everyone to forget about it because she thinks it's not a big deal. Dad wants to tell my siblings, so he asked me to set up a video call. I scheduled it for later that morning and made it clear that it was only for adults, so they thought it was about the kids. When they found out the real reason for the call, they were just as shocked as the rest of us. Dad said he loves me again during the call. He told them he was doing okay after the call, and then each of us reached out to Mom and told her to spill the beans, mostly for the sake of the grandkids. But she kept on refusing, saying it wasn't a big deal and she wanted us to just forget about it. Even though she's apologized a bunch to Dad, she still wouldn't give any details. Later that day, she called my wife and said she was worried that Dad was getting fed up and had left. So my mom was ghosting her calls, so she asked me to hit him up thinking he'd actually pick up. While chatting with Mom, my wife brought up the whole thing about spilling the beans about her side piece. She didn't spill the guy's name, but she did mention that he kicked the bucket. She was saying that since he's dead, there's no point in anyone else finding out, and she didn't want her grandkids to know. My wife made it clear that the guy was already dead. Even though it didn't change anything, Mom was still adamant about not sharing his medical history for possible genetic conditions. She got more and more upset as my wife kept asking. I ended up calling Dad and talking to him, and he said he was fine but needed some space from Mom to calm down. Later, my sister set up a call for the three of us, including Dad. During the call, she suggested that we all get DNA tests to make sure my results matched Dad's genes. I thought my dad might not be cool with it, but he was actually totally supportive of the idea. So, the next week, all of us got our DNA tested by a national laboratory. It was easy because there were labs close to where we all live. We got the results a week later, which showed that my sister and brother are definitely my dad's biological kids, but I'm not. It was a relief to finally know for sure, but it still kinda sucks to feel like I don't really fit in, especially since I don't know who my real dad is. My real dad is still a mystery. When I told my dad about it, he made a joke saying he wouldn't trade me for $1 million, maybe for $2 million though. That's just his way, he's a great guy to hang out with. The day after I got the DNA results, I called my dad and told him I was planning to come over the next morning and spend the weekend with him. He told me not to come because he was heading to the Gulf Coast in the morning. He and my mom bought a place there last year. He was planning to sell the family house and move. He retired about 2 years ago after working for almost 44 years and started getting his first Social Security check in January, just before everything went down. I asked if Mom knew about him leaving, and he said she did and was pretty upset, but he had to get some space to figure out what to do next. I totally understood where he was coming from, but I felt really bad for both of them. He told Mom he wasn't gonna talk to her until she spilled the beans about the guy she was seeing. He also said that even if she came clean, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay in the relationship. I was shocked by how quickly his mood changed, especially since he had been handling things so calmly before. He said that after a week of her crying and saying sorry, he had had enough. But his plan worked because that night, Mom had a meltdown and told him everything. She told me about how she hooked up with this guy who owned the laundromat in the town where they first lived together. She would go there every week to do laundry because they didn't have their own washer and dryer. He was divorced and lived upstairs, and that's where it all went down. Mom said she got involved with him because she was feeling really low about herself at the time, and this older guy was giving her all the attention and saying all the right stuff. She was only about 24 years old. So, when the dude was in his late 30s and had teenage kids, Ma was all like they only hooked up a few times and then she dumped him. She swore she never saw or heard from him again. Then, 6 years ago, she saw his obituary in the paper and that's how she found out he died. She told Dad that was the only way she found out and promised she never even thought about him after ending things. She wasn't happy he died, but she felt kinda relieved. Why I know. Reading his obituary, she thought the secret she'd been holding onto for years was finally buried with him. But fate had other ideas. Even though Mom spilled the beans, Dad up and left for Mississippi the next day and has been holed up there for the past 4 months. Mom's a wreck without him, feeling like her whole world has been turned upside down after 40+ years of being together. Despite her mistakes, I know she loves him more than anything and this whole situation is tearing her apart. She calls him every single day. So, he's been chatting with her, but he's made it clear he's not ready to meet up with her yet. He's even mentioned that he's not sure if he wants to stay married to her. But he's told us kids that he's not thinking of getting a divorce at his age. He just needs some time and doesn't want to be around her for now and maybe never again. I totally back his decision, but I'm kinda torn about it. I think Dad will be fine on his own, but I'm worried about Mom's future well-being. Basically, she's pretty much on her own in our hometown and hardly ever goes out. She looks really upset and has dropped a lot of weight. She said she's willing to do anything to make things right with Dad, but is not interested in making up right now. Personally, I'm doing better now, but it feels like there's a dark cloud hanging over me. One of the hardest things I had to do was tell my kids about this. They were really upset, especially my oldest son who always looked up to his grandpa. I made sure to let my grandkids know that everything was cool. I brought my fam to see my dad for a week vacay and we had a blast. Since then, the kids have been good knowing he still cares about them. I also got back in touch with my half-siblings. My half-sis is in Illinois and my half-bro is in Indiana, both in their late 50s with adult kids and grandkids. When I told them about the affair, they weren't shocked since we never had a close bond. So, these kids were basically brought up by their stepdad since they were little and they totally see him as their real dad. They didn't even show up to their bio dad's mom's funeral. But get this, they did tell me about a serious health thing in their bio dad's fam, heart disease. My bro from my bio dad had a heart attack at 48, my bio dad died from a heart attack at 68, and his dad had one at 42. So, you're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this. Hey y'all, I wrote this story to help me process things and warn anyone with kids who's thinking about cheating in their marriage, just don't do it. The fallout goes way beyond you and your side piece, messing up your whole family for good. I'm Jennifer, 40, and my husband Michael, 43, is leaving me because of something awful I did. Here's the deal, I was at a work party with my colleagues, and we were all. Man, we were killing it this year with hitting our targets. We even surpassed them and went above and beyond. We were having a blast, not a care in the world. I told my husband I might be coming home late and if I got too drunk, my work buddy Stacy, who's 35, would give me a ride. Along the way, I started flirting with every good-looking colleague or company affiliate. I was shamelessly doing it, and I can't remember the last time I felt so desired or touched that way. My husband and I aren't close anymore. No more touching or talking, man. It was like 2 hours before we bounced from the party when things got spicy in the bathroom with this dude from the crew, let's just call him Frank, who's like 33. Frank and I had a crazy time in one of the bathroom stalls, it was epic. I couldn't control myself and we kept going for like another half hour until we heard someone in the stall next to us. We quickly got ourselves together and made plans to link up again to finish what we started. I went home, but all night I couldn't stop thinking about Frank and me. I even snuck in some alone time next to my snoring husband, fantasizing about another guy. I felt a little guilty, but having Frank's number made it even more thrilling. We texted non-stop for 3 days and decided to meet up the next weekend after a party. This time would be at the hotel suite he booked for us to stay in town. I was more excited than nervous because I was finally getting some attention again, all in the same week. I wasn't really thinking about how Michael would react if he found out. Pretty dumb to think he wouldn't, right? We hung out for a bit, had dinner, talked about work, flirted, touched, and played footsies. Things were heating up and I couldn't resist, next thing I knew we were both naked. It was wild and we did it multiple times, it felt incredible. The next morning I panicked because I forgot to tell my husband I was staying out. I saw 3 texts and 10 missed calls from him, so I quickly got dressed and headed home at 7 a.m. So, I was lucky enough to find my husband still knocked out when I got out of the shower and changed into my PJs. I tried to sneak into bed next to him without disturbing him, but I only managed to get about 4 hours of shut-eye before he woke up all pissed off, demanding to know where I had been all night. I told him I went to Stacy's after a late work meeting and we ended up working on some Excel sheets while having a few drinks until we both passed out. I also mentioned that as soon as I woke up, I hightailed it back home to avoid worrying him even more. Obviously, he was pretty upset about the whole situation. I told him I was either gonna stay late at work or go to Stacy's place, but I made up some excuse about being too busy with work to call and let him know. Surprisingly, he believed me, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. Not long after, I got caught in the act. 2 days ago, I texted Frank to meet up one more time before he left town, and he agreed, but it had to be in a public place. So, I told Michael I was going out to dinner with Stacy and one of her friends. So I was working on some stuff for my partners, trying to wrap up some paperwork and get a contract signed. I had everything all set up, even told him which restaurant we were meeting at. I had no clue how he would react though. I left work early to head to the fancy restaurant where he had told me to meet him. Stacy and I were having a blast, kissing and flirting, when out of nowhere she freaked out and grabbed my arm. She explained that Michael had called her, asking if I was with her at the restaurant and that he was on his way. We rushed out with her and ran into Michael. He wanted to know where we were headed and we told him we were going home. Michael grabbed my hand and started grilling me about where I had been the Saturday before. He brought up Stacy trying to cover for me, but it was clear she had no idea where I was on Friday night or tonight. Then Stacy spilled the beans about the office party, feeling guilty. She mentioned seeing me leaving the bathroom with Frank, and it looked like more than just a friendly encounter. She was just being nice, but she didn't know anything else. Michael wasted no time and steered the conversation to the car, telling Stacy to head home. He hit me with a barrage of questions, wanting to know how many times it had happened before and after that night, and even asked if it went down that day in the restaurant bathroom. He wouldn't let up with his questions, and I ended up admitting that the first time was at the office party when I was drunk. But he didn't buy it and accused me of lying. I had to come clean and confess that it had happened. Man, it went down more than once. I told him I hooked up with Frank last Saturday and he lost it, slammed the steering wheel, called me stupid, and said I wrecked the only good thing in his life. We drove home in total silence. When we got back, he locked himself in our kids' old room and talked to his buddy Albert all night. Later, when I was in bed, he came to our room and dropped the bomb. He wanted a divorce. He said he'd keep the house because he thought I didn't deserve to live there. We've been together as a family for 19 years. He said not to tell our son yet because he's busy with college exams and he'll tell him when the time is right. I was confused and didn't know what to do. Michael wasn't speaking to me, and the last time we talked, he told me to either get a mortgage through work for an apartment or use my savings to rent one. He wanted me out within a week. I'm completely lost. I texted Frank and explained everything, asking for help. Frank suggested renting a hotel. Yo, found a room close by for a week while I figure things out. Told him to hold up until I'm done packing. Even though I'm losing everything, I'm turning to someone else, the same person who's making me lose everything I had with Michael. Now I'm in the hotel room Frank got for me, and Michael hasn't said a damn thing to me. Looking for a cheap room to rent until I can get a mortgage for a house. Tried hitting up Michael so many times, but it seems like he's ghosting me. Hey, so I tried calling Michael on both his landline and cell phone, but it seems like he's blocked me. I'm so lost right now. Should I just move on with Frank or should I try to fix things with Michael? I talked to Stacy and asked her why she spilled the beans about our affair that night. She said she felt bad for being involved without knowing and that she's a terrible liar. She couldn't have kept it secret even if she had known beforehand. I went back to our place, but it seemed empty and the blinds were all messed up. Man, they closed early. I don't know what to do. Still texting Frank, he's been my rock during this tough time. Right now, I'm renting a van in this kind of fancy trailer park that I never would have found if Frank hadn't booked that hotel room. It's not great, but not terrible either. Trying to adjust to this new life has been a real challenge. It's been a month since I moved out and Michael still hasn't reached out. But then my lawyer hit me up, saying Michael finally did. I just filed for divorce and the papers just showed up at her job. I feel like this is the end for me and Michael. We put in 19 years of blood, sweat, and tears, and now it's all gone. I've lost my family and I'm worried about how our son will take it. He'll probably call me once his dad breaks the news, but I'm not sure how Michael will react. Will he accuse me of cheating? I'm scared that my son will end up hating me. I hope Michael does right by me and keeps our son out of this whole mess. The only thing keeping me going right now is the thought of seeing my son again. I couldn't deal with it if he gave me the cold shoulder. I just couldn't handle that. We've been married for 16 years and in the first 8 years, I cheated on him twice. Now I see that I was in the wrong and my husband didn't deserve that. After my last slip-up 5 years ago, we decided to call it quits. But we couldn't stay apart. We spent a year trying to make things work, and then we had our daughter. At that point, he wanted me to stay home and take care of her. I wasn't really cool with it at first, but I kept working. Then our son was born and he asked again, so I decided to do it. I thought I'd go back to work after a year, but that didn't happen. Now I'm at home with both of them. I love my kids, but I also want to get back to work. I feel like I can't ask for it because of my past mistakes. I'm a totally different person now. I've been through a lot, as have my kids. I would never cheat again. I've learned my lesson. Please, just tell me the truth. Man, I've been dealing with this for years and I really need some honest advice. Nobody around me knows what's going on, so I have no one to talk to about it. How can I open up and have this conversation? I never thought I'd be cheating at work. I've known the people I cheated with for a long time, even before I started my career. Plus, they don't even live in the same city as us anymore. Financially, it doesn't make sense for me to stay at home since daycare would only cost about a quarter of what I make. I'm broke because I'm not working, but if it helps him feel better, then it's the right decision. I do plan on going to therapy by myself once I start working again. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go back to work, since our insurance doesn't cover it. But after reading the comments in this discussion, I think I'll look for a cheaper option and hold off on going back to work for a bit longer. I get why I cheated when we got married. I had these crazy high expectations that no one could live up to, especially considering he's only human. I screwed up. There are things I wish I did differently, but that's no excuse for my actions. I stupidly listened to two people who told me what I wanted to hear. I don't blame my husband. My cheating is my own fault and I know it was a big mistake. I'll carry that guilt forever, which is why I vow to never cheat again. But I also know you should never say never. That's why I'll go to therapy when I start working again. I know you mentioned ending things after. So, he chose to be with you even though there might be other reasons, so he's gotta accept your decisions while you're together. Unless you cheated with a coworker, then that's a whole other story. Honestly, neither of you should be in a relationship right now. You betrayed him twice and he shouldn't have forgiven you unless he saw you really trying to change. But you can't just stay home all the time to make him happy. It'll take a toll. It really messes with your head and heart, and that's not good for you or the kids.